Hey everyone, welcome back to your favorite sales and revenue podcast. I'm your host, Ross Rich, and you're tuning in to 10 out of 10 GTM. We got a special episode today. We got Jeff Benson, head of worldwide sales at enosix. And yeah, thanks so much for taking the time, Jeff.
Hey, thank you. Glad to be here.
Awesome. Well, I know we're going to do as always, we're going to jump into our three top tips for operationalizing deal excellence. A couple of my favorites in here, especially a book that I hold near and dear that you mentioned that you're a big fan of. So before we jump into things, if you don't mind giving yourself a quick intro, we'll jump right in.
Sure, thanks, Ross. Head of global sales here at a company called enosix. And basically, I'll just say that we are the world's first and only real-time integration solution for SAP. And so, really differentiated in the space. And so, I've been here for about a little over a year and a half now, and been in some large companies. But my dream role, are startups. Done about three of those, starting back in with S1, then a couple of professional services companies, and then before here, I was at Paymetrics. So ready to do one more and make a biggest splash as possible.
Awesome. Yeah, and it sounds like you guys are off to the races already. But yeah, before we get into some of these tips and tricks, maybe to get to know you a bit better, curious to hear how did you find your way into revenue leadership, Jeff?
One of the first startups that I was in was a company called S1, and we had basically created the internet banking space. And from there, I was highly involved with the sales side of the house and
Hmm.
saw all of course, the glamour that went along with it. And I thought I could do the same job. So from there, I went to a startup called Thought Mill that eventually was acquired by American Systems. And that was my first role, carrying a quota and basically as a practice leader. And the first year was hard, but toward the end of that first year, blew it out of the water and eventually started scaling up to run a team. So
Awesome.
that was my first foray, and I got bit by the bug and have been in the business ever since.
Awesome. Awesome. And what was it about sales? And you mentioned getting bit by the bug. I know a lot of folks that have been in revenue leadership, although it's a hard job, it's hard to leave. So what was it for you that kind of really caught your attention and made you want to stay in it?
I'll tell you, for me, it was about the ownership of your destiny. You literally owned the success, and it really came down to owning a number, and now owning a much broader number for across a team. But you really got the true feel for being an entrepreneur, and in whatever role. If you're in a commercial role, I see that
Mhm.
that's really the opportunity to feel what an entrepreneur looks and feels like every single day. So to me, that's the exciting part, and I probably would never do another role, as far as my career path is concerned.
Totally. Yeah, no, I agree. I think the best sellers and revenue leaders look at it as, really their book of business and not just that expression in terms of, kind of the revenue that you own, but kind of how you approach it and kind of just about the end result, right? And there's a million different ways to do it. I think that's what myself and a lot of other folks really enjoy about the role, right?
It's something that's interesting, I think, Ross, is that how much it's changed. I mean, like I told you about the first startup I did, and that was probably, early, you know, 2000s, and now here, 20 years later, 23 years later, and the commercial pursuit, the account executive, the go-to-market motions have just completely changed, especially in the last 3 or 4 years.
Hmm. Yeah. What do you think one of the biggest changes has been? Yeah.
Yeah, I think engagement. I think, I mean, many years ago, people were very relationship driven, and then we heard the challenger sale come through, and now I think we've got it's the team sale. I think that the way that you approach sales now, it is the entire team, the entire organization that is standing behind a product, behind a solution, and pursuing that customer or that prospect, all for the same reason.
Yeah, team selling is definitely a huge aspect of it. Folks want to have us bring in our CTO to talk about our roadmap, specialists to talk about our integrations. I think the bar has definitely been raised in terms of how you need to approach those partnerships, not even just the enterprise ones, right? But even the mid-market. I think there's higher expectations than ever for how you show up as a sales organization, right?
Yep. And even though everything is virtual or on a video or Zoom call or whatever, you really still only get that first chance to make that first impression.
Totally. Well, this might be a good segue to talk about kind of the three strategies and tactics that you shared ahead of time that we're going to be digging into. Maybe as a quick overview, kind of mention them, and then we'll kind of go line by line down them. Maybe starting with the one that kind of stood out most to me, which was around that idea of extreme ownership. Maybe the first one we're going to be digging into, not just the book, but also the concept behind it. We're going to be talking about one of my favorite topics too, sales playbooks, and that it is a living thing, not just kind of the playbook that we're going to execute on for the year and how to iterate on that, and then finishing with your concept behind ABC and the twofold version of that. So yeah, maybe kicking off extreme ownership. If you don't mind, kind of sharing what that means to you and how it ties into your kind of approach to sales leadership, revenue leadership.
Yeah, sure. So what's interesting is actually if I look far deep into my background, I'm a military guy, was a Marine a long time ago. So this is a book that I would think that would naturally resonate with me. And what's funny though is that someone on my marketing team actually referred me the book. So I digested it and it made it really part of how I look to manage a team. So I look at managing
Mhm.
teams more based upon principles and less based upon rules. Rules don't allow for much maneuverability, flexibility, and creativity, whereas a principle based approach really does. And so
Mhm.
when I read this book, I said, I think a lot of this is inherent in what a lot of great leaders are and how they run teams. So to me, it was just a book that I think explained a lot. And it also, I think it outlines some of the deficits that we see in some organizations, especially larger ones where, you get into a little bit of a CYA mode. And here, this gives an opportunity for leaders to take true ownership. It takes a lot of courage to do that as a leader. Some leaders can step away
Mhm.
from it and pass the fault to someone else. But I think taking that ownership first shows good leadership. And I mean, some of the examples that I remember from the content that I picked up was, just and this goes back a long time, of course, the KISS principle. Keep it simple, stupid. Don't
Yeah.
overcomplicate plans, and always reference back to the strategy. And leave room for adaptability. And I think that's one of the critical parts. And there's a whole bunch of pieces in it, like, and this is something that's part of who I am, and maybe even to a point that it comes a little bit of a fault, but act decisively. Perfectionist leaders will tend to get bogged down in needing more and more information. They're always looking for the 100% right decision, and there is no such thing,
Mhm.
especially, if you're in a competitive situation. So making a 50% decision sooner is better than making a 100% decision never. And because it just won't ever get to that point. But understanding those calculated risk, I think, is really the right kind of calculus that somebody has to do in that. And there's a whole bunch of other principles. Discipline equals freedom. That is following a playbook, which allows somebody to operate within a framework, but not necessarily rules based and what have you.
Well, maybe double clicking into that and how it shows up in your business and how you found it impactful. This is a
Yeah.
concept that took me a while to figure out as a seller, right? Is like kind of the more structure you have, the more freedom it gives you and creativity with a customer. Love for you to kind of share your perspective on that because it's been something that's been really hard for me to kind of articulate, but I definitely felt it both as a seller and as a leader.
So you're exactly right, and it almost sounds counterintuitive, but freedom
Totally.
really comes from working within a framework at that playbook, and this means really, which is at the core of most military organizations, decentralized decision making. If you have your playbook created and it's working in the manner that you would like to see it work, and you've proven it out, which means you
Mhm.
haven't stopped iterating, but you've probably gotten to a point that you don't have to iterate as much. That gives the seller in the field, the person who's meeting with the prospects, driving the next steps and what have you, that gives them the framework to work against instead of creating framework on their own. Because one of the things that a framework will allow to do is to put measurements in place. And that way you can just look at the measurements of where you are against a particular yardstick and moving from one step to another. What are the entrance criteria? What are the exit criteria? What are the expectations? Where should the client be? Who should be involved? And if you look at those yardsticks at each stage and each movement through the playbook, you'll know pretty quickly what needs to happen. And so the feedback isn't, hours and hours upon deal reviews and asking, tens of or hundreds of questions. Instead, it's, hey, it looks like we're here. I feel that we're here. Here's the things we're all seeing. We all know it. And we're able to correct and adjust as we go through the opportunity.
Totally. I think that also ties to kind of the KISS principle, right? Keeping it simple. Like, hey, we can talk about the million different facets of a deal. Who are we talking to? Why are they buying? All that stuff. But we all know it comes down to a few things. Are we talking to the right people? Is there that need? Why are they going to do this now? And do they have budget, right? I think what you're talking about kind of helps simplify to make it more objective versus subjective, right?
Yeah, and I think but something else that I fundamentally believe in, and it's part of some psychological training that I went through with some prior sales training. It actually comes from the old Franklin Covey approach, and it's basically seeking to understand, but always allow the customer an out, a way to say no, so that it's almost counter selling to understand why somebody's willing to part with some money or a lot of money or budget or what have you, and spend time. And so allowing people that out will let you prioritize, how you spend your time in your book of business and not just on an opportunity.
Got it. So yeah, you mind digging into that a bit more? So you're basically qualifying them out. Is that kind of the concept there, Jeff?
Yeah, it's basically, the thing is salespeople love to have big fat pop lines and lots of leads coming in, and then basically working their averages to get to the right deal. And most salespeople will tend to work the deals that they feel has the best chance of closing, but they won't tend to work deals that take a lot to close. And I
Mm,
think in some regards, if you take those deals that just will not that will maybe not just a hard pursuit, but that will take a lot of time and effort, you need to look at those early and understand, is it going to be a good fit? Can we sell into this organization? Are there going to be complications down the path? And try to figure out if this is an organization that's too small, too large. They're going for a totally different approach. They don't understand what we do. You're going to have to really wrap yourself around that account. And if you become transactional, that's hard. Instead, I think that what many sellers would like to do is say, well, and most sellers take the path of least resistance like water. So in this case, don't always take just the water course, but do the early prep work to make sure you've got an opportunity that needs to be worked and it is working, and then put it against those measures as you go through each stage. Know what the criteria is when you're at 25%. Have you had these discussions? Have you done these steps? And of course, that's going back to the playbook. If you haven't, then maybe that opportunity, don't talk about it ever pipeline review, because it's an opportunity that's probably not going to happen.
totally. And I think this goes back to a concept that I've seen a lot, which is I think the top reps tend to have the smallest pipelines because they're the highest converting and they're able to understand either through, you know, objectively looking at their deals or just the intuitive, they can kind of intuit it, who's the best fit, where is this really going to move even early in those deal cycles, right? They kind of have that intuition around qualifying those deals early, right?
Yeah, absolutely. The thing is, each rep is different, and I've actually got a team of AEs here that range in age, experience, background, just really in every single rep is very different from the next. And the thing is you have to get accustomed to how they look at those deals. And of course, that's where the playbook will help me do that. But yeah,
Mm-hmm.
that early investment of that time, understanding that customer, that prospect, what their business is, and how you're going to align and differentiate. I'll tell you, for us, is if we can get past the 25% mark, our win rate is close to 75%. But if we don't do well at that 25% mark, and sometimes we don't know that we're doing well or not because we don't lay the opportunity across that true sales book or a playbook, then we tend to see deals go radio silent. And I think understanding how you're going to win a deal and how it's going to progress early on gives you that feeling of confidence so that you're not always
Mhm.
scrambling.
Totally. Yeah, that's a really good point. Well, maybe now's a good actually transition point to talking about your second kind of sales tactic outside the first one was extreme ownership, which I think we hit on a lot of key stuff there, which is iterating on the sales playbook. And as we've talked a lot about, maybe to start, would love to hear your description of what a sales playbook is.
So me, and I've built a few playbooks over my time. As a matter of fact, I'm probably on my second iteration here at enosix. But I see a playbook really as a repository first of all the content that sellers need to be successful, and
Mm,
also a process that will allow them to step through the stages of an opportunity in a very simplistic form, but with lots of job artifacts, tools to leverage. Like we even have one because we have a very unique MSA language because we don't host data. Most customers think we do. So we even have
mm,
training that our CEO has helped conduct to help us negotiate that MSA discussion in by the third meeting because we know it's going to come up, in the eighth or 10th meeting. And so we preempt that. And so I think a playbook really is a living, breathing artifact that guides all matters of how a go-to-market team can be successful. And it really gives you the yardstick of what that success looks like. So what does the perfect opportunity look like coming in? And what is the perfect opportunity at the end going out so that professional services can
mm,
pick up that deal, that customer, and be successful in it. And we know what a great one looks like as it comes in the door. So we can, and then we know the logical steps. And when something starts to fall out, you can at least start to measure, how you're going to be successful.
yeah.
You'll know, hey, at this point, we're probably going to get a lot of questions on technical and security. Here's how you do that. Now, at this point, you're going to start getting kind of competitive discussions. Here's how you place landmines for not necessarily discredit the other players in the space, but really ask questions about how they're going to do
Mhm.
certain things that are going to go back to those competitors. It's all that and more. And as a matter of fact, I think playbooks could tend to get, overdone at certain times. But what we
Yes.
do is we want our playbook to be this iterative kind of document. And as a matter of fact, I think this is where Accord comes into play because for us, we see the playbook being part of Accord because that's where our AEs live every day. They don't necessarily live in Salesforce as much anymore. They live inside of Accord. And so we're bringing more capability and discretion into Accord from our playbook. That'll take some more time to do, of course, but that's where our AEs live and breathe today.
Totally. And you mentioned kind of the thing that comes up a lot, which is, there's a lot of detail that can be in a playbook. And I tend to see it being overdone in a way that isn't consumable by sellers and managers, right? It's kind of, you have so many things in there. It's kind of like, okay, there's this 20-page document. How are you able to make it digestible? So say a new rep joins or someone's been here for 6 months and they want to refer back to something to actually be impactful on a deal. How do you make sure that it's simple enough to actually execute upon?
You know what? That's actually a constant battle that I think that any
Yeah.
organization will have. I think for us is having the AEs and the sellers actually involved in the creation of the playbook. So it's not something that
Mm,
is written upon high, is handed down, and then enforced, but instead it's
yeah.
something that we all participate in creating. So we all have ownership, and it's not something that somebody just has to live by and because someone told them to. And we'll question. We'll say, hey, do we still need to do this? Is this still correct? And so we will literally change those parts of the playbook and we'll do it at the AE level so that we're all involved
Yes.
in basically making our own playbook better for us.
Totally. And this almost ties really well back to your first piece around extreme ownership. This isn't just extreme ownership from the top down. Every level really needs to buy into it, be able to push back, right? If the A's are going to be able to own their book of business, it can't just come from you if it doesn't make sense with what they're doing with their customers, right?
Absolutely.
Awesome. And so let's talk about maybe this iteration process, because I was actually thinking about this at kind of your VP level. How do you think about iterating on, on that kind of monthly, quarterly basis, yearly basis? What's working, what's not when it comes to the sales playbook?
So here's what we do today. So we have win-loss reviews, and we'll incorporate feedback from that. We actually have a third party that's also going out to our prospects and customers, wins and losses, and they do a very detailed win-loss review. We'll incorporate that feedback. And then as well, we will look at our deal reviews. And so our deal reviews right now, we're doing a deal review for any deal that's above 50K, for example. And I know in prior organizations, it usually had to be $1 million plus, but now in the SaaS
Yeah.
world, 50K, eventually with professional services and add-on products, it becomes $1 million deal eventually. So what we do is through those deal reviews with the leadership team, as well as the what we call the pursuit team as a whole, they all participate by all those kind of reviews of our process, what's working, what's not working, what the customers and prospects are saying. They may be able to question, hey, I didn't see the ROI, and we may have presented 3 different ROIs, but they didn't get it enough. Or and the thing I told you about enosix, we are truly differentiated from our competitors in that we are the only real-time way to connect SAP to any kind of front end out there. And the thing is we'll ask customers, do you believe in that you need real time? How do you do that today?
Mm.
And so there's a lot of educating that has to go on. So we're really iterating how we do that in a fundamental way to drive improvement in our pursuit and every single pursuit. So we'll have a quarterly review with the entire go-to-market team. Will go off site and we'll probably revamp pieces of that every single time. And one of the great
Got it.
things
So it sounds, yeah.
I was just going to say, our
Yeah.
CEO has also come from the space. He's adding a lot of ROI and financial analysis into it, which I think is great. Our founder comes from an e-commerce space. He has a great deal of insight in how enosix specifically positions our solutions for strength. And so he is now also involved in helping us iterate on some of those pieces. So it is, I won't say it's in a constant state of flux, but it is always looking for ways to make it better. And eventually, I think what it will do is it'll become a great training tool once some of the dust settles down around the different parts of it.
Totally. Yeah. One differentiator I hear, the way you're describing your iterations of playbook is actually bringing a lot of different perspectives and objectivity to what's working, right? I think a lot of this is what I've seen is typically done by the frontline folks who can sometimes be too close to the deals, right? Sometimes it can come down to, the relationship, or you kind of have this, really narrow perspective on it. Whereas you're bringing in third parties, you're bringing everyone from, CEO, founder level down to sellers and sales managers, which I think is, a good reminder for us out there that,
I'll tell
might
you
be looking at this on the micro level.
one of the things we've recently made a strong push to is mapping to the business and aligning to the business because integration is typically seen as an IT purchase, but it's usually IT doesn't purchase integration just for the sake of integration. There's usually
Yeah.
some reason on the business end, such as I've got to have real-time quoting configure capability. I've got to have e-commerce that's actually working for my customers, and so improving the customer experience. So all those things right there is why we're now have really incorporated a map to the business, and we literally will not have a POC unless we have that map to the business.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, tying it to that board level goal, right? This isn't just about this kind of micro IT integration. Like, what are we trying to unlock for the company so you can be a better partner to your clients, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And this is why a lot of one of the pieces that we're incorporating now in the sales playbook is the preemptive due diligence you do before call one. And
Mm.
this is before even at the point where it's just a lead. That is important. It's like a gold mine. And so I can literally just me and the founder are rolling out training. What's the best 15 minutes you can spend prior to call one? What's the next 30 minutes you spend prior to call two? And then what's the 30, 40 minutes you spend prior to call three to make sure you're understanding the business you're dealing with and what kind of issues they may be. Don't go. No one can ask the question, "Hey, tell me your pains." No one's going to want that kind of discussion.
you haven't earned the right to do that, right? I think
Oh,
that's a
you
really
have.
good point. I love your concept behind that, which is doing the work up front. And I think this is what the best sellers and sales teams, how they think about their interactions with customers. It's not like, how can I ask them the best questions to uncover this? Is if you don't come in with a perspective, both from you talking to this persona, and understanding kind of their world a bit better than they can, because this is all you focus on, as well as their business challenges and where they sit in the market, you don't have the right to ask them those questions and to uncover those pain points. And I don't think a lot of people kind of focus on that as much. It's kind of like, what questions do I ask? How do I kind of do the sales tactic thing? Sometimes it's just work, right? Just researching the company, researching them, earning the right to uncover that stuff, right?
Absolutely.
Awesome. Well, good kind of moment to transition to our third topic. So we've covered extreme ownership. We've talked a bit about sales playbooks and how to iterate. The third piece is your twofold version of ABC. So as we know, always be closing. But what does ABC mean to you in kind of a variety of different ways, Jeff?
So I'll tell you back um, many years ago, I actually used to play the scene from Glengarry Glen Ross, where ABC is written up on the wall. And I
Yeah,
don't know if you know the history behind that scene, but Alec Baldwin had never met those actors prior to that scene, and he wanted to come in with his piece completely rehearsed, and he wanted to throw all these veteran actors off their game, and he really did. So it's just a little kind of trivia behind that
I
scene,
did
but
not know that.
yeah, it was if, and it's just the thing that I'd read about it. So, um, and that's the whole coffee for closers. Jack Lemmon was completely taken aback when Alec Baldwin yelled that at him across the room. So, taking that to the next level of where we are now, and of course, you always are wanting to be closing or selling or what have you. Well, the two things that I iterate on that today is really twofold. One is always be qualifying, which is really about closing, and then always be recruiting as a sales manager. So, as a sales team, a pursuit team as a whole, always be qualifying really is, I would say, push my sellers to counter sell. And that is to challenge the quality of the opportunity. Be determined, be tenacious in finding out why a customer would part with a great sum of money, and why would they do that now? Because it's
Mm,
always about the forecast and how accurate you can be in your forecast, and why does it matter now? If you can't answer that, then we probably don't have the kind of qualified deal that we need to all be working on. So
mhm,
that counter sell is offering the customer an out, and even help explain counter alternatives to what they could do, or asking why they haven't done this before. That will give you a lot of insight into why somebody, I don't know how many times I've had prospects tell me, we've got this huge problem, we've got to solve it. And I'll say, how long have you had the problem? Oh, about 5 years. Well, then what makes this year any different? Is
yeah,
somebody going to get fired? Are you going to lose a huge chunk of your business? Because every company has a ton of issues they got to solve. Which ones are they going to solve now? And if you
yeah.
can find that this particular opportunity is at the top of that heap, well, then maybe you've got a chance. But you've got to almost counter sell and allow them to almost walk away. But that's what I mean by always be qualifying. The always be recruiting piece as a sales manager, as in a high growth company, I probably do 2 interviews a month. I'm always looking for great talent, regardless of where they sit. And the thing is, with sellers sometimes looking for greener pastures or their own, career moves. I always keep a pipeline of individuals that I think could be great adds to the team, be they
Mhm.
CSMs or AEs themselves. So that's just my kind of twofold version of ABC. So it's not just about closing. There's a lot else that goes into it.
Yeah, I think kind of you're sounds like you're going back in terms of the pipeline and the funnel, right? Closings at the very end. Well, you're closing based on what? Highly qualified deals that you're approaching the right way. And on the other side, the sellers who are going to be able to have those conversations. So maybe a question on each of those. First, on always be qualifying. What are some of the best questions or tactics that you've seen and train your team on to effectively qualify? I love the piece around like how long have you been trying to solve this problem? What are some other kind of top questions that you train your teams on?
So one of the things that I kind of harp on is keep asking the question why until you get to a number or dollar. And so if you're asking, oh, we got to solve this now. Okay, well, why? Well, because, so-and-so says that this is really important. Why do they say that? And if you can't get to the point where someone says, well, we are losing 10% of our customers a month and it's costing us, $1.3 million, over the life of the quarter and so on. Well, now that also helps you with pricing.
Mm,
If you can, if someone can tell you, explain in financial numbers, this is what I call monetizing, the problem. If you can monetize the problem, then you're probably going to have a better chance of prioritizing it. And then at the same time, being able to price and align pricing, that works best for the prospect as well as where you can position it. So I would say that just just ask why until you get to the final kind of conclusion. I'll give a real quick example. This is many years ago. I'm actually an individual contributor. I'm working with a very large insurance company up in Canada, as a matter of fact. And they just basically said, hey, we need to upgrade our software. And I said, well, that's a lot of money. Why do you need to just upgrade? He goes, well, we really need to get there by the end of the year. There's some new features. I said, there's not $300,000 worth of new features. So why do you really want to do this? Well, I kept
yeah.
asking why till it got to the point where they said they were going to pay $1.6 million for support from Microsoft because they were out of compliance on support for the version of Microsoft that they were running.
Hmm.
And our solution works in the next version, but it allowed them an upgrade path. And if they didn't upgrade, they were going to pay roughly $2 million a year for that support. And I said, well, great. That gives me a timeline, that gives me budget,
Yeah.
without him telling timeline and budget. So it really gave a great explanation on how you monetize an opportunity or a problem.
Yeah, I love that because I think a lot of people can come across. I mean, I hate this term because I don't think it's that negative, but in the negative way, like very salesy. It's like, when do you need to make this decision? How much is it going to cost you? Like,
Exactly.
you kind of feel like this. I'm trying to figure out your pain points and like this very negative interaction versus like what you're saying. Just understand their business. If you have a genuine conversation, there should be some real drivers out there that are going to kind of translate to you helping them and you being the right partner. And if not, you'd rather find that out earlier than later. And I think it's also more fun being on the other side, having these, being curious, having these genuine conversations, getting to know someone's business and what's driving them versus this weird, like, sit on the other side of the table, the zero sum game that I think a lot of sellers unfortunately have been trained on, right?
Yeah, and a lot of sales methodologies, mention things like BANT and all the acronyms that you can use, and those are all great. But the thing is what are the tools to get you to that? And those tools change over time. Maybe 10, 15 years ago, you might could say, what's your budget? What's your timeline and so on. But today, if you were to start with the questions you were just giving an example to, you're probably going to be kicked out of that pretty quick. And so you
I
have
don't
to
want to
come
talk
at
to that
this.
person.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, you're going to have to come at it as a, the business problem they're trying to solve and why they're trying to solve it. Why is it prioritized right now? And to say if it's not the right time, yeah, I'll give you all the information you want to look at about who we are and what we do. But granted, we don't have it. One of the things that I try to start meetings with is an end in mind, and that is a
Mm.
single statement while we're here. And I'll ask at the end of that discussion, are would you agree to answer this question or not? Always allow the or not at the end so that you can continue to talk or not.
Totally. Yeah, give them that out. Well, this has been an awesome conversation. Everything from extreme ownership, yeah, one of my favorite books and concepts, talking about sales playbooks and this idea of ABC, but when it comes to not just closing deals, but also qualifying and recruiting. We're going to wrap things up here with my favorite part, which is the rapid fire questions. I'm going to ask you for one word or one sentence answers to a handful of questions. Are you ready?
Yeah, good deal.
Let's do it. Okay, first one. What do you think the main reason teams miss their ARR targets?
Lack of prioritization and pre-work on the deals they're in.
Love it. Main resource or favorite resource related to revenue leadership. It could be a book, a course, a podcast.
I think today that people, sellers, sales managers, everybody in a high growth company needs to spend time sharpening their sword and consuming new content. And this is, you and I've talked about grit, science of scaling, all these podcasts. I literally
Mhm.
would take probably at least 2 hours a week to make sure that I'm sharpening my sword to look at that content. But one of the ones that I'll do a throwback to from many years ago, it's called "Let's Get Real" or "Let's Not Play." It
Mm,
basically the subtitle. It's the demise of the dysfunctional selling process, and but helping clients really succeed.
love that one. Yeah, that's a great throwback. Next one, number one challenges for revenue leaders going into 2024.
I think depending upon the kind of organization and who you're selling into, I think lead generation will probably continue to be a bit of a challenge, and then converting those leads into opportunities that can be pursued. We are spending a great deal of time right now planning and preparing for that. And I think a lot of that has to do with your messaging as well as how you do the pre-work to invest in that first discussion is so critical. And if you don't
Mhm.
come prepared for that first discussion, you just think it's going to be a demo and you're moving on, you're going to have really bad conversion rates.
I agree. I think one of our biggest levers recently has been not the closing stuff, but the earlier on in the sales cycle, that first call. Couldn't agree more, and positioning being really important. Um, favorite segment to work on: SMB, mid market, or enterprise?
I have always been an enterprise, although maybe one day I wouldn't mind trying some of the others, but I just have always sold into the probably Fortune 1000, be they banks or manufacturing companies.
Awesome. Most important organization in the revenue world, is it sales, CS, or marketing?
So I have a unique answer here for you. So to me, there are three legs of a stool, and you can't sit down at the revenue table without all three legs supporting you, especially as we evolve into a much smarter engagement model and methods with prospects and customers through tools like you know Accord and Six Sense and Mark. I mean, just there's just so much today that each part of that stool or that you're setting on is just as critical. So it's not just about closing, and it's not just about finding the opportunity, finding the lead. It's following up on it's all those pieces coming together.
Totally. Uh, your favorite way to unplug from the demands of leadership?
Well, I'll tell you, I am a lot like most of the people that you hear in the kind of the grit podcast. I rarely take any time off. I usually work 60 to 80 hours a week, but when I do take time off, I'm usually spending time with the family or I'm on my Harley doing cross country. As a matter of fact, we're planning right now for our August trip to go out to Sturgis next year. So I do, if I work hard, I'm going to play hard, but I'll work an awful
Awesome.
lot as well.
Yeah, unfortunately, there's no shortcuts to success in this world when it comes to revenue. But last question: which revenue leader should we talk to next and have on the show?
There's a couple of guys that I think that have influenced me. And what's interesting is one of these guys is really a peer, and him and I have worked together off and on, many times. He's actually at a company that's a startup, but they also just went private. They were public, and they're called Strip It. And it's his name's James Ray, and I think he's more in a product or sales lead kind of role now, but just probably one of the best sellers I've ever seen, and that I've been around for many years. So I would say he would be a great guy for you to talk to.
Awesome. Well, we'll have to follow up with him. But last, really appreciate you taking the time, Jeff, to share, kind of your career learnings. If you haven't checked out Extreme Ownership, I think a lot of sales leaders out there would really enjoy that book and the concepts. And like you said, kind of formalizing a lot of things that you probably learned through trial and error. Kind of our discussions on the sales playbook and how kind of having more structure can actually develop more freedom for sellers and objectivity there. And the last piece is I don't think anyone would disagree around focus on really better qualifying deals and always be recruiting out there, especially if you don't have an open role, bound to be in that position where you wish you were 2 months ahead on hiring the next head. So appreciate you taking the time, Jeff, and sharing your learnings with the community.